Clara Mae Whitfield stepped into the bitter Colorado wind with burn scars hidden under her dress and only 40 cents to her name. She had sold herself as a mail-order bride to a stranger named Hollister, expecting to leave one prison for another. But when a tall rancher looked into her eyes and saw a person, not a purchase, she felt a flicker of hope. And hope can be a dangerous thing. If you believe in folks getting a second chance, stick with us to see how Clara's story ends. Through the frosty window, she saw the strangers who would witness her shame. You have survived worse than this, she told herself. Her scars, a puckered map of pain from her shoulder to her hip, were a secret she had kept since the fire. A doctor once told her she was lucky, but it always felt more like a curse. She finally stepped out onto the platform. The Colorado cold was a physical thing, sharp and unforgiving against her thin wool dress, as she searched the faces for the man she was supposed to marry. A deep voice to her left said, "You are her." It was not a question. Clara looked up at a man built as solid as the mountains behind him. His face was weathered and scarred, but his eyes were surprisingly kind. He introduced himself as Jed. He did not look her over like cattle at an auction, which she had prepared for. "You are smaller than I pictured," he said. "I am stronger than I look," she replied. He simply nodded and lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, while whispers followed them. Someone said he had been running that advertisement for 2 years. 2 years. Clara stored that piece of information away. At the edge of town, a sturdy work wagon waited. Someone had thoughtfully placed a thick blanket on the seat. "The ride to the ranch takes nearly 2 hours," Jed explained. They rode in silence for a while, the town disappearing behind them. Then Jed spoke, his eyes fixed on the road. "Are you going to tell me what you are running from? It does not matter to me, but knowing usually helps." Clara could have told one of the lies she had rehearsed for miles, but something about his quiet manner made her speak the truth. "My husband died in a factory fire 2 years ago," she said. "The foreman used to lock the doors. When the fire started, Henry went back inside for me. He saved me, but he died. The fire left me with nothing but his debts." She hesitated. "And scars," Jed prompted gently. "I was burned badly. The doctor said I should be grateful just to be alive." "Are you grateful?" he asked. No one had ever asked her that. Jed stopped the wagon and turned to face her, his gaze steady. "I will tell you something, Clara Mae. I placed that advertisement because my home is too quiet. I have a son who needs a mother and a ranch that needs a woman's touch. I am not looking for someone perfect. I am looking for someone willing to stand with me when the storms come." "Can you do that?" "I can try," Clara answered. "Trying is enough," he said. The ranch was not a small cabin, but a large, beautiful log house nestled in a valley. "This is yours?" she asked, amazed. He nodded with the quiet pride of a man who builds things to last. Before the wagon stopped, a boy of about 12 years burst from the house. His eyes were full of suspicion. "Tommy, mind your manners," Jed warned. The boy crossed his arms. "Why should I? She is not staying." The words hit Clara hard. She had prepared for a harsh husband, not a child who hated her on sight. "The last one did not stay," the boy added. "Neither did the one before that." Clara saw the fear under the boy's anger. He had been left too many times. She climbed down and walked right up to him. "You are right to be careful," she said, her voice even. "So I will make you a deal. Give me 30 days. If I am still here after 1 month, you give me a fair chance." Tommy studied her with eyes that looked far too old. 30 days, he repeated. He slowly uncrossed his arms. "Fine. 30 days. He turned to go back inside, but paused at the door. "But I am not calling you Ma." Fingers were calloused and warm. Jed spoke quiet-like, his breath a cloud in the cold air. "Your letter," he said. "It was different. The other women, they wrote about what they wanted from a husband, what they expected to get. But you, Clara, you wrote about what you were willing to give, what you were ready to work for." His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a simple touch that spoke volumes. "That told me everything I needed to know about your character." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she fought them back. She hadn't let herself cry in 2 long years. Still, there was something about this quiet, steady man that made her want to hope again. "I have to warn you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am not the person you imagine. My past has left scars, some you can't see. Jed didn't step away. He just looked at her with those clear eyes. Then tell me when you are ready, or do not tell me at all. I am not marrying your past, Clara. I am marrying the woman you are right now. The cabin was plain, but a warm fire blazed in the stone hearth. Everything was handmade, sturdy, and practical. There was not a single frill or decoration in sight. It is not much, Jed said, seeing her look around. But you can change whatever you like. Make it your own. Clara felt a dizzy spell wash over her, a mix of relief and hunger. Jed's hand was on her elbow in an instant, holding her steady. When was the last time you ate a full meal? He asked, his voice firm but gentle. Sit down. I will fix you some supper. He moved around the small kitchen with a quiet grace, slicing bread and ladling hot soup into a bowl. He set it in front of her. Eat slow, he warned. She ate until the painful knot in her stomach finally eased. Thank you, she said, the words feeling small. You are mine to care for now, he replied simply. Clara took a deep breath. Jed, I must tell you, I might not be able to give you children. The doctor said, the burns? She trailed off, unable to say more. Jed's expression never flickered. I already have a boy who needs a mother. The ranch needs a strong woman. If children come, they are a blessing. If not, we will find another way. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a genuine smile touched Clara's lips. I think I might like you, Josiah Hollister. Jed, he corrected, a hint of a swallow on his own face. And I reckon I might like you too, Clara May. Just then, Tommy appeared in the doorway, his eyes landing on Clara's empty plate. She ate it all, he stated. She was hungry, Jed said. Clara looked at the boy. Tommy, I have a proposal for you. I hear there is a wedding to plan, and I would like your help. Why would you want my help? The boy asked, his eyes full of suspicion. Because this is your home, Clara answered plainly. You should have a say in who joins your family. You help me learn how this place works, and I will be your ally. The boy considered her. The last woman who came tried to make me call her mama on the first day. Left after 2 days. I will not ask you to call me anything but Clara. And the one before that complained about the dust. I am from Philadelphia, she said. I know about hardship. Tommy gave a slight nod. All right, you can have the back room. Ma used to sew in there. Your mother was a quilter? Clara asked gently. Tommy's voice went soft. She made real pretty ones. Jed has them put away. Clara looked at her future husband, seeing the old pain in his eyes. Maybe, she said to Tommy, when I have earned the right, you could show them to me. The boy nodded quickly, hiding his face by stuffing more food in his mouth. At his bedroom door, he paused. Hey, Philadelphia woman. Clara turned. You have got 29 days. Do not waste them. The back room was small, but the bed had a beautiful faded quilt. It is more than I have had in years, she told Jed. It is perfect. The door. I'll be right out front. The door does not lock, but you will be safe here. You have my word. She found herself believing him. He gave a short nod and turned to go, but paused in the doorway. Clara, about those scars you mentioned. His voice was gravelly, but kind. When you are ready to show me, I will be ready to see them. All of them. And I promise you, what I see is not going to change my opinion of you one bit. Clara's breath caught. You cannot know that. I know what I know, he said, pulling the door partly shut. Get some rest. Mornings come early out here. Clara lay in the dark, her hand over her scarred side, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt a tiny spark of hope. In 30 days, she would know if this stern, kind man could truly accept her. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jed and Tommy talking in the kitchen. Dressing quickly, she stepped out to face her first day. Both of them looked up as she came in. There is coffee, Jed said. Biscuits, too. I aim to earn my keep, Clara said, walking toward the stove. Tell me where to start. Jed and Tommy shared a look, a silent reassessment. The eggs need gathering, Tommy said slowly. The coop is out back. And the goat needs milking. I know my way around chickens, Clara said. The goat might be a new experience. I could show you, Tommy offered, the words sounding reluctant. I would appreciate that. Jed nodded, a hint of a smile on his weathered face. Go on, you two. I have got horses to see to. Tommy grabbed a coat and headed for the back door. Clara paused and looked at Jed, who was watching her from the window. Thank you, she said, for this chance. Thank me in 30 days, he replied, but his voice was warm. If you are still here. She stepped out into the crisp Colorado morning, ready to make every single day count. The chicken coop was chilly. Tommy handed her a basket without a word. Ever done this before? No, Clara admitted, but I am a fast learner. That is what all the city women say, Tommy muttered. Right before a hen pecks them, Clara reached under the nearest chicken. The bird squawked and jabbed its beak into her knuckle, drawing a drop of blood. She did not make a sound. Tommy stared at her hand, then at her face. You are not going to cry. Would that make it hurt less? A flicker of respect showed in the boy's eyes. He tossed her a clean rag. Wrap that up and move quicker next time. She wrapped her hand and tried again, moving faster. The warm egg settled perfectly in her palm. Not bad, Tommy almost smiled, for someone from the city. They filled the basket in a new kind of silence. Next, he led her to the barn. The goat is named Mabel. She bites. Wonderful. Are you scared? Clara looked at the young boy who had lost so much. I am terrified, she said, but being as scared never changed a thing. I would rather be scared and useful than just scared. Jed says something like that, Tommy mumbled. Says fear is just a feeling, not a fact. The milking went surprisingly well, with Tommy showing her the ropes. When they got back to the house, Jed was mending a harness. He glanced from Clara's messy dress to the full pail of milk. She did not quit, Tommy announced. Mabel only kicked her twice. Better than most, Jed grunted. I am standing right here, you know. Tommy mumbled an excuse and hurried outside. Jed put down his work. Let me see that hand. It is nothing. She unwrapped the rag from her knuckle. Jed took her hand, his own rough and calloused, but his touch was gentle. This needs cleaning, he said, leading her to the basin. Infection does not care how you got hurt. He poured a liquid over the cut that burned like fire. Clara hissed but held still. You are tougher than you let on, Jed noted. Tommy seems to think so too. A warmth entered Jed's eyes. That boy does not give out compliments often. He said I was not bad for a city woman. Jed's mouth twitched. That is high praise. He bandaged her hand, his fingers staying on hers a moment too long. Clara suddenly felt how close he stood. Clara, he said, his voice low, I need to tell you something. What is it? There is a man, Roderick Ashworth. He might be coming here. The name hit her like a slap. How do you know that name? A letter arrived yesterday. It was a warning. Said Ashworth was asking questions about where you went, who sent it. It did not say. Clara's heart sank. She thought 3,000 miles would have been far enough to be safe. He is my late husband's cousin, Roderick Ashworth. He wanted to marry me, but I refused him. Jed's jaw tightened. And now that your husband is gone, he still thinks he has a claim. Clara let out a humorless laugh. Roderick doesn't want me. He wants to own me. Jed's gaze was hard as iron. He will not touch you here. You do not know him, she insisted. He is a rich and powerful man. He ruined me in Philadelphia, making sure I could not find a job or a home. He tried to starve me into giving in. Is that why you answered my ad? Jed asked softly. I needed to get away, she admitted, meeting his eyes. At first, this was just a place to hide, but that was before I met you, before I saw this ranch, before I started to hope this could be a real home. Jed placed his hand over hers. It is real, Clara. And whatever that man thinks he is owed, he is not getting it, not as long as I am standing. The back door flew open, and Tommy rushed in, his face red from the cold. Pa, there is a rider coming up the road. He is on a fancy horse wearing city clothes. All the color drained from Clara's face. It is him. It has to be. Jed's voice became flat and cold. Stay inside, both of you. Jed, she started. I mean it, Clara. Stay in the house. He grabbed his coat and rifle, then strode out to face the man. Clara hurried to the window with Tommy right beside her. The rider was just as she remembered him, dressed in an expensive coat and fine leather gloves. A man who had never done a day of honest labor. Roderick Ashworth stopped his horse about 20 feet from Jed. Mr. Hollister, I presume. Roderick's voice cut through the cold air. I believe you have something of mine. I do not have anything that belongs to you. Clara Whitfield, he said smoothly, my cousin's widow. She was not herself when she left Philadelphia. I have come to take her home. This is her home now, Jed stated plainly. Roderick laughed, a condescending sound Clara knew all too well. Surely you do not think she wants to stay in this wilderness with you? What I think is my own business, Jed said. And what Clara wants is hers. Neither one is your concern. I am making it my concern, Roderick snapped, his pleasant tone gone. I have been patient for 2 years. I have traveled 3,000 miles. I will not leave without her. Clara could not hide any longer. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Roderick, his face lit up with a hungry smile. Clara, my dear. You should not have come here, she said, her voice shaking. Someone had to save you from this foolishness, he said, stepping down from his horse. Jed moved to stand between them. My choices are perfectly clear to me, Clara said, finding her strength. I chose to leave. I chose to come here, and I choose to stay. You are just confused from your grief, Roderick insisted. Do not you dare speak Henry's name, Clara's voice cracked. You did not even attend his funeral. Roderick's perfect composure began to slip. You are making a scene. I am telling the truth, she shot back. I can give you everything, he said, his voice low and persuasive. A life of comfort. What can he offer you? Nothing but hard work and isolation. Clara stepped forward to stand right beside Jed. He can offer me honesty, something you would not recognize. I will not ask again, Clara. Good, she replied, because my answer will not change. For a moment she saw the real man beneath the polished surface, full of rage and possession. This is not over, he snarled, swinging back onto his horse. I have resources you cannot imagine, Hollister. And when you use them, Jed's voice was calm as stone, I will still be standing right here. Roderick turned his horse and rode off until the sound was gone. Clara's knees buckled, but Jed caught her, carrying her inside and setting her gently in a chair by the fire. He knelt and took her trembling hands. He is gone for now. He will come back, she whispered. He always does. He destroyed my life before, without ever lifting a finger himself. This is not Philadelphia, Jed said, his grip firm and reassuring. And I am not some man who can be bought. What if he offers you a fortune for this place? She asked. I would tell him what I am telling you now, he said, looking her straight in the eye. Some things are not for sale. This ranch, my honor, and the woman I plan to marry, he paused. If she will still have me. Clara just stared at him. You still want to marry me after all this? Did you think one man in fancy clothes would change my mind? He asked, a small smile on his face. Clara, I have survived a war and raised a boy on my own. Ashworth does not scare me. The only thing that scares me is the thought of you leaving. I will not go, she said. There is nothing for me back there. Then stay, he urged. Marry me tomorrow. Let us make it official before he can try anything else. Tomorrow, she breathed. Reverend Pike owes me a good turn. He will do it. Just then, Tommy appeared in the doorway looking pale but resolute. I could be a witness, he said quietly, if that would help. Clara looked at the boy who had once distrusted her so much. Tommy, that man wanted to take you away, Tommy said, his jaw set. I do not like people who take things. And I reckon, he swallowed, I reckon you are not so bad for a city woman. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me in 2 years. Do not get used to it, he mumbled, but she saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of losing another chance at having a family. Jed watched his son go, then looked back at Clara. That boy is starting to count you as one of us. And you? She asked softly. What do you count me as? Jed reached up and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Mine, he said simply, if you will have me. Clara leaned into his warm touch. I will have it, all of it. A real warm laugh escaped her lips. I cannot believe I am laughing. A man just threatened to ruin my life again. And I am laughing. Sometimes laughing is all that makes sense, Jed said, pulling her to her feet. Now we have a wedding to get ready for, and a ranch to run. How about we start with some supper? They worked together in the kitchen with a surprising comfort, moving around each other easily. Clara discovered Jed's stew was bland, So she found some old herbs in a cabinet and transformed the meal into something delicious. Where did you learn to cook like that? Jed asked, clearly impressed. My mother taught me, Clara said. She was practical and tough, but the best person I ever knew. I lost them both when I was 16. She stirred the pan, lost in thought. It taught me that people always leave. You learn to stand on your own or you fall. Jed was quiet for a long moment. My wife, Ellen, she did not leave. After we lost the baby, she just faded away. Some folks go and some just get lost. Went out like a light. The doctor claimed her heart just stopped, but I reckon her spirit quit first. That was 4 years ago. Tommy showed up a year later. I sometimes think the Lord sent that boy to fill the empty space she left. Jed thought for a moment. Mostly he does. There are still some holes, but since you came, there are fewer. Just then, Tommy came back inside, his cheeks rosy from the cold. The horses are all set. Something smells mighty good. He looked back and forth between them. Y'all been talking about feelings, haven't you? Is that a bad thing? Claire asked. Feelings make people do dumb things, Tommy said, grabbing a bowl. Pa says so all the time. Your pa is a wise man. Don't go calling him wise. It will go straight to his head. But Tommy was smiling just a little. When he sat, he picked the chair right next to Clara. The three of them ate as the fire popped and the wind howled. For the first time, Clara felt like she might just belong there, in that little makeshift family. After they ate, Tommy pulled out an old checkerboard. You play? I used to, with my father. I was never any good. A real grin spread across Tommy's face. Perfect. They played 3 games. Clara lost the first 2 badly, but she was starting to figure out how Tommy played. The 3rd game was much closer. You are getting better, Tommy said, almost sounding let down. Most grown-ups just give up. I told you I am stubborn. That she is, Jed said from his chair. Stubborn as a mule and twice as pretty. Clara felt her cheeks get warm. Flattery is not going to get your mending done. It was worth a shot. Tommy made a face. Ugh, stop it. I am going to bed. He gathered the checkers, then stopped. Clara? Yeah? Tomorrow, I can show you how to ride a horse the right way. Most city folks sit all wrong. It was a peace offering, clumsy, but real. Clara accepted it. I would like that very much, Tommy. He gave a quick nod and vanished into his room. The door closed gently behind him. That boy, Jed said, shaking his head. I have been trying for 3 years to get him to teach me anything. He just says I am too old to learn. Maybe he just needed someone new to teach. Or maybe, Jed added, he needed someone worth teaching. They sat quietly as the fire burned down. Clara watched the flames, thinking about the long day. You are thinking awful loud over there. Jed said, I am sorry. Do not be. Just tell me what is on your mind. She thought for a second. I am thinking about tomorrow, about being my wife, about whether I deserve any of this. What do you think you deserve? I used to think I deserved a family and happiness. After Henry died, I figured I just deserved what I got, being lonely, poor, and scared. Jed moved to the bench beside her. I am going to tell you something I have never told a soul. Not my wife, not Tommy, not anyone. I had a brother, Samuel. He looked up to me, so he followed me into the war. He thought I was some kind of hero. There was a small fight. The information was bad. I made a bad call, told my men to hold our ground when we should have run. Samuel was shot. He died in my arms, asking me if I was proud of him. Jed's voice was flat, but his hands were shaking. I did not speak for 2 years after that. People thought I was slow in the head. Ellen married me anyway. My point is, I know about deserving things. For 15 years, I have felt like I do not deserve anything good because of what I did. But deserving is not the point. The point is what you do with what you are given. He turned to her, his eyes full of old pain. You survived a fire, you escaped a bad man, and you traveled 3,000 miles with nothing but hope. Whatever you think you deserve, Clara, I think you have earned the right to be happy. I would like to help you with that. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were warm and strong around hers. I am scared, she said. Me too. What if I disappoint you? And what if you do not? He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. Now get to bed. My future wife needs to know how to ride a horse. Your future wife. It sounded strange to say. You have got time to get used to it. The Reverend can probably come the day after tomorrow. So soon? No point in waiting. Unless you want to. Clara thought of Roderick and his threats. Then she thought of Jed and Tommy and the warmth of this little house. No, she said, I do not want to wait. The day after tomorrow it is then. She stood there holding his hand. Jed, yeah, thank you for standing up for me, for seeing me as someone who matters. You do matter. His thumb made circles on her wrist. It is time you started believing it. Clara leaned in and kissed his forehead, a soft promise. Good night, Jed. Good night, Clara. She went to her room, her heart racing. The day after tomorrow, she would be Clara Hollister. For the first time in 2 years, the future felt like something to fight for, not something to fear. Outside, snow hit the windows. In town, Roderick Ashworth was surely plotting. But in this small house, Clara found something she thought was gone forever. Hope. It was a small, fragile thing, but she held on to it. And across the hall, Josiah Hollister stared into the fire, finally feeling like his house was a home again. Clara couldn't stop wondering if a man like Jed, who carried the weight of his brother's death, could ever find love again. But he had her, and for now, that had to be enough. On the morning of their wedding, the air was crisp and cold. Clara was up before dawn, her stomach in knots. Today, she was getting married again, to a man she hardly knew, a man whose gaze made her feel seen. She put on her best blue wool dress. As her shaking fingers worked the buttons, the scars on her side pulled tight. It was a sharp reminder of the secret she kept from Jed. A knock came at the door. It was Tommy, his voice small. He held out a little wooden box. This was my ma's, he mumbled, his face flushed. It's her wedding comb. Pa said I could give it to you. She opened the box to find a beautiful ivory comb carved with little roses. Tommy, I can't take this, she whispered. You can, he insisted, his voice cracking. Ma would have wanted you to have it. He looked her right in the eye. And you ain't so bad for a city woman. Clara knelt down to his level. This is the most precious gift I've ever received. Thank you. Tears welled in her eyes. Don't cry, he said, looking alarmed. These are happy tears. He seemed to soften a bit. You're really going to marry him? Stay for good? Clara knew what he was truly asking. Promise you won't leave us too. I promise, she said softly. For 26 days or 26 years, I'm not going anywhere. Reverend Pike was due around noon. Widow Tucker is coming to be a witness, Jed said over a quiet breakfast of slightly burned eggs. She's the closest thing to a doctor we have out here. He paused, looking at Clara. She'll want to check you over. Make sure you're healthy, Yang. It's just tradition. Clara's hand instinctively went to her side. Look me over? It's nothing improper, Jed assured her. Just making sure the bride isn't carrying some sickness. His eyes met hers. And if she finds something, we'll deal with it together. That word together settled in her heart. An hour later, Widow Tucker arrived. She was a small woman with sharp eyes who looked Clara up and down like she was pricing cattle. So you're the one, she said. Took him long enough. He turned down 6 others before you. Why, Clara asked. The widow's eyes softened. They didn't have the look of someone who'd stay. But you do. She nodded toward the bedroom. Now let's have a look at you. Clara's stomach sank, but she led the widow into the room. Turn around, Pearl said. Clara took a deep breath, unbuttoned her dress to her waist, and turned. The silence in the room was heavy and long. Lord have mercy, Pearl whispered. What happened to you, child? A fire, Clara said, her voice flat, at a factory 2 years ago. Pearl's rough fingers gently traced the puckered, discolored skin that covered her entire left side. Does Mr. Hollister know? Pearl asked. He knows I was burned, but not how badly. The widow helped her fasten the dress. You have to tell him before you say your vows. He deserves the truth. And what if he changes his mind? Clara asked, her voice trembling. Then he ain't the man I think he is, and you're better off knowing now. Back in the main room, Pearl gave Jed a firm nod. She's healthy as a horse. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, she'd said. Scars don't change that kind of looking. After Pearl and Tommy stepped outside, Jed turned to Clara. Something's wrong, he said gently. I can see it on your face. Not wrong, she said, her heart pounding. Just something I need to show you, before you can't change your mind. Nothing's gonna change my mind, Clara. You don't know that? She whispered. With trembling fingers, she turned her back to him and let the dress fall from her shoulders, exposing her scarred skin to the man she was about to marry. She heard him draw a sharp breath. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the rejection she was sure would come. Don't, she choked out. Please don't lie and say it's not that bad. Instead of pulling away, she felt his warm hand, gentle as a snowfall, press against the worst of the scars. Does it hurt? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. She could only know. What can I do to make it hurt less? She heard him ask. Clara turned to face him and saw tears in his eyes. You're crying. I'm angry, he said, his voice rough. Angry this happened to you. Angry you thought for 1 second I'd care about some scars more than I care about you. He cupped her face in his hands. Clara, I've seen worse. These scars don't make you ugly. They show you're a survivor. They make me proud you chose me. You still want to marry me? She whispered. More than ever, he said, and sealed his promise with a kiss. It felt like a lifetime ago, because now Clara knew the truth. Jed held her as she cried, not with shame, but with relief. After 2 long years of fear, she was finally free. I've got you, Jed murmured into her hair. I am not letting go. The ceremony was simple. Reverend Pike stood before them, his face kind. Clara wore a simple blue dress and Jed a clean shirt. They spoke their vows, their voices shaking but strong. I promise to stand beside you, Clara said, in storm and in sunshine. Jed answered, his eyes locked on hers. I promise to protect you, to respect you, to build a life with you, not over you, for as long as I have breath in my body. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. Jed's kiss was full of promise. The celebration was just coffee and a cake from town, but it felt like a feast. Clara sat beside her husband, a ring carved from pine on her finger, feeling like she could finally breathe. Mrs. Hollister, Tommy said, testing in the name. Sounds weird. She smiled. Good weird or bad weird? He shrugged, but he took the piece of cake she offered. Later, as dusk settled, she and Jed sat by the fire. We're married, she whispered, still amazed. We are, he said, his arm holding her close. What happens now? He smiled. Whatever we want. But their peace was short-lived. A hard pounding on the door shattered the quiet. Hollister, a voice yelled. Open up! It is Sheriff Marsh. Jed opened the door to the sheriff and 2 deputies. Their faces were grim. Hate to disturb you on your wedding night, Jed, the sheriff said, tipping his hat to Clara. But we have a problem. He explained that Roderick Ashworth was in town, claiming Clara was not in her right mind and that he was her legal guardian. He wants me to bring you in for questioning. Clara's heart went cold. That is a lie. I know it is, ma'am, the sheriff said, but Ashworth has papers from back east. He is threatening to bring in federal marshals if I do not cooperate. He looked at Jed. I thought you should know. The sheriff lowered his voice. There is more. He has been asking questions about your land claim. After the sheriff left, Clara began to pace. He is going to destroy everything. He followed me here. He is targeting you because of me. Stop, Jed said, taking her arm gently. This is not your fault. He is a bully who cannot stand being told no. That is on him, not you. Tommy appeared in his doorway, his face pale but firm. I heard everything. That fancy man wants to take Clara away. Does he not? He is trying, Jed said, but we will not let him. Tommy walked over and stood right beside Clara. She is ours now, he declared. He cannot have her. Despite the fear, Clara had to laugh. Well, when you put it that way. Tommy looked at his father. Pa has not smiled this much since I have known him. It takes a special kind of woman to make that face look happy. The tension broke, and the 3 of them sat together by the fire. Jed explained what they were up against. Ashworth wanted Clara, and he wanted their ranch, but they still did not know why the land was so important to him. Someone needs to find out what he is planning, Tommy said. Let me worry about that, Jed told him. Right now, we all need some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. After Tommy went to his room, Clara turned to Jed. The boy who had hated her just days ago was now trying to protect her. He is so loyal, she said softly. Once you have earned it, Jed replied, taking her hand. And you have. In that moment, with trouble gathering like a storm, Clara had never felt safer. Just hold me, she whispered. I do not want to be alone tonight. You are never going to be alone again, he promised. He led her to their bedroom and they lay down together, his arms a shield around her. Clara woke to find Jed gone. Panic flared until she heard voices from the kitchen. She found Jed and Tommy at the table with a nervous young man. Mrs. Hollister, he said, standing quickly, I am Samuel Brennan from the land office. I have information about Roderick Ashworth. Samuel explained that Ashworth had come to the office, asking about Jed's title. He found a mistake, Samuel said, his voice low. Your land was bought with soldiers' scrip, but the original owner never officially filed the transfer. According to the law, the land was never truly yours. Ashworth filed his own claim on it this morning. He is trying to steal your ranch. 3 days ago, Samuel showed up, nervous as a jackrabbit. He laid out the new mining surveys. There's a silver vein, ma'am, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Runs right through your land. It's worth a fortune. Millions, the word hung in the air. Ashworth knows, Samuel warned. He is buying up everything around you. Your place is the last piece he needs. He explained Ashworth's plan. Use lawyers to challenge Jed's ownership. They found a 6-month period during the war when Jed was listed as missing. Ashworth claims that meant Jed abandoned the property, making his title invalid. Can he do that? Clara asked, her voice trembling. He has enough money to try, Samuel answered grimly. Jed's voice was low and dangerous. Why are you telling us this, son? Samuel looked down. Men like Ashworth, they do not care who they crush. Besides, he looked up at Clara, you gave my mother credit when no one else would. You paid for my schooling. He offered to be their eyes and ears in town. Jed shook his hand. We appreciate it, Sam. After he left, Clara felt sick. He never wanted me, she choked out. He only wanted the land. She had led him right to it. I am such a fool. Tommy's voice was fierce. You are not a fool. You are a victim. There is a difference. The boy's wisdom, born from his own deep pain, cut through her despair. Jed put a hand on his son's shoulder. We all have pain, he said, but we have each other. That man does not know what he is dealing with, Jed declared, his jaw set like stone. So what is our plan? Claire asked. First, Jed said, we find out exactly what he has filed. Then we fight. This is our home. Nobody has taken it from us. A few days later, Ashworth filed his challenge. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out. They had 2 weeks to save everything. Clara got to work, writing letters to anyone who might listen. Tommy wrote out, gathering support from neighbors who knew Jed had never abandoned his claim. But Jed knew what they really needed. Witnesses, he said one night, someone who can swear I was here. But most of the old-timers were gone. Just then, Tommy burst in. Pa, old Moses the Trapper, his daughter, Margaret. She was here the whole time you were gone. She lives Denver now. A flicker of hope appeared in Jed's eyes. Are you sure? Widow Tucker told me, Tommy said. Margaret would know everything. Jed stood up. That is a 3-day ride. Clara looked at him. Then you had better leave now. You cannot leave now, Clara pleaded. Ashworth is watching us. I have to, Jed said, taking her hands. Margaret's testimony could save us. He looked at his son. You will watch over her. Jed, we have been married 4 days, she cried. I know, he said. Then he kissed her, full of desperation. I love you, Clara. I should have said it sooner. I love you too, she whispered. Come back to me. An hour later, he was gone. Tommy came and stood beside her on the porch. He will be back, the boy said. I know, Clara answered, pulling him close. For the first time, he did not pull away. The first night alone was the longest of Clara's life. The second night, trouble arrived. Someone is outside, Tommy whispered, shaking her awake. By the barn. Clara grabbed the rifle Jed had left her. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was solid steel. Stay behind me. She eased the door open. In the moonlight, she saw 3 figures. That is far enough, she called out. This is private property. One man stepped forward. Easy, ma'am. Mr. Ashworth just wants a talk. He can talk to my husband, she replied. That is the thing, the man said, his voice slick as oil. Mr. Ashworth knows your husband is gone. Before he could finish, Clara fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed through the quiet night. The next one goes in your chest, she said calmly. Leave now. The men scrambled for their horses and fled. Tommy stared at her, wide-eyed. You really would have shot him. I really would have, she confirmed. Now, let us get inside, and we are not going to tell your father about this. He would blame himself for leaving, and this is not his fault. It is Ashworth's. 3 more days crawled by. Clara and Tommy kept watch, sleeping in shifts. On the 4th morning, Widow Tucker rode up with bad news. Ashworth brought in 3 lawyers from San Francisco, she said, her face lined with worry. They are at the courthouse, looking for any mistake, any misplaced signature to use against you. Clara's chin lifted. Jed is coming back with a witness, someone who can prove he never abandoned this land. Pearl's voice was gentle. Child, 1 witness against 3 big city lawyers. That might not be enough. But Clara would not let herself believe it. Then we will find more. Later that day, their friend Pearl brought more bad news. Ashworth was buying up debts all over the valley. He is making people owe him, she said. A man with that kind of power can make folks say or do anything he wants. After Pearl left, Tommy looked small and scared. What are we going to do, he asked. Clara pulled him close. I do not know yet, but we are not giving up. We will start over together if we have to. I am scared, he admitted. Me too, she said, holding him tight. But being scared does not mean we are beaten. Your pa always says fear is just a feeling, not a fact. Easy for him to say, Tommy mumbled. He is not here. No, Clara agreed. He is out there right now fighting for us. On the 5th day, Sheriff Marsh showed up on her porch, twisting his hat in his hands. Mrs. Hollister, I need to talk, he said, refusing her offer of coffee. I've been thinking about what's right and what's legal. He took a shaky breath. Ashworth, he owns my debt now. He bought my note from the bank. He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, consuming shame. He said he'd forgive it all if I made sure some evidence got lost before the hearing. What evidence? Clara asked, her blood running cold. The original survey map, the sheriff confessed. The one that proves where Jed first staked his claim. Without it, Ashworth's lawyers can tear his case apart. He looked down at his ruined hat. I was going to do it, but then I remembered what my father told me about a man's worth. A man's worth ain't measured by what he owns, but by what he won't sell. Sheriff, I am not selling my honor for Ashworth or anyone else. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is a copy of the map. I had it notarized myself. Whatever happens, this copy exists. Clara's hands trembled as she took it. Why? He will ruin you. He said, probably, but I will still be able to look myself in the mirror. He settled his hat. Tell your husband some of us remember what he did for this valley. He is a good man and deserves better. What is coming? But the sheriff was already riding away, leaving Clara with a piece of paper and a heart full of fear. Days passed with no word from Jed. Most neighbors, gripped by fear of Ashworth, shut their doors to her. They are scared, Tommy told her. Ashworth threatened anyone who helps us. On the 8th day, that changed. Clara heard the sound of many horses. She grabbed her rifle and ran to the window. A group of riders was approaching, led by a woman she did not know, and beside her rode Jed. Clara flew out the door. Jed swung down and swept her into his arms. I am back. We are going to be all right, he introduced the woman. This is Margaret Chen. Her father was Moses Whitehorse, and she has a story to tell. The woman dismounted easily. She was older, maybe 50, with silver in her dark hair and wise eyes. Mr. Hollister tells me you have been holding this place together. Not alone, Tommy helped. Margaret looked around the ranch, a softness in her face. My father loved this land. He would be turning in his grave if he knew someone was trying to steal it. You will testify? I will do more. I have my father's journals and his letters to the territorial office. Everything that proves he looked after this land while your husband was at war. That fancy Easterner thinks he can buy history. He does not know who he is dealing with, and I did not come alone. She gestured to the other riders. These folks knew my father. They know the truth of this land, and they are all willing to swear to it in court. Clara counted 8 riders, 8 witnesses against Ashworth's money. Why would you all risk this? An old man rode forward. Some things are worth the risk. Besides, that man, he pointed to Jed, saved my son's life during the war. I have been waiting 20 years to repay that debt. We all have our reasons, another rider added. Hollister is fighting for what is right, and we are here to back his play. Tears streamed down Clara's face. Jed's arm tightened around her. I told you we would find a way. That night, Jed held her close. You are thinking too loud, he murmured. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. What if we lose? Then we keep fighting. I did not survive a war to give up now, and neither did you. The courthouse was packed to the rafters. The Hollister case had become the whole valley's fight. Ashworth sat with his 3 expensive lawyers, looking as confident as a fox in a henhouse. Jed and Clara sat at the other table, with no lawyer but each other. Judge Harrison, a man known for being tough but fair, called the hearing to order. This will determine the rightful owner of the Hollister Ranch. Mr. Ashworth has filed a challenge claiming the land was abandoned. We will now hear the evidence. Ashworth's lawyer, smooth as snake oil, called 3 witnesses. Each one lied, claiming Jed's land had been empty for nearly a year. Jed squeezed Clara's hand, a silent signal to stay calm. Judge Harrison looked at Jed. Do you wish to question the witness? Jed stood. Just one question for Mr. Morrison. You say you saw my property sitting empty in July of 1864? That is right. That is interesting, because in July of 1864, you were in the territorial prison for stealing horses. I have the records. So either you escaped just to check on my land, or you are lying under oath. Which is it? The man's face turned white. I must have the dates mixed up. Jed looked at the judge. Your Honor, I would like to call Margaret Chen. Margaret walked to the front, full of dignity. She swore her oath, and her voice rang through the courtroom. My father, Moses Whitehorse, lived on the Hollister property from 1863 to 1866. He cared for the land while Mr. Hollister was away at war. When Mr. Hollister returned, everything was just as he had left it. Do you have proof? The judge asked. I have my father's journals detailing every day he was there. I have his letters. I have receipts for supplies. She placed a thick folder on the table. I have the truth, Your Honor. And the truth is, Josiah Hollister never abandoned his land. Ashworth's lawyer jumped up, shouting they could be forgeries. Then test them, Margaret said, her voice like steel. My father was an honest man. His word and his writings will hold up. One by one, the other riders told their stories. The old man whose son Jed had saved. A woman he had helped through a hard winter. Each story painted a picture of a man deeply connected to his home. Ashworth's confident smirk finally began to crack. Finally, Judge Harrison called the last person. Sheriff Marsh, do you have something to add? I do, Your Honor. The sheriff pulled out the copied map. This is a verified copy of the original survey, establishing Mr. Hollister's claim. It shows the boundaries dated 1860, 4 years before the so-called abandonment. It also shows he made improvements to the land every year, even during the war. How? Because records were filed with the territorial office. Mr. Hollister arranged for his property to be cared for while he was away. That is not abandonment. That is responsibility. Ashworth jumped up. This is ridiculous. These witnesses have been paid. Sit down, Mr. Ashworth, the judge said, his voice like ice. You will get your turn. I do not need to respond to these lies. You have documents that have been disproven by witness after witness. The judge's voice got harder. And I am very concerned that your witnesses have been lying under oath. Your Honor, I said, sit down. Ashworth sat, but he stared daggers at Clara. It was the pure rage of a man who had never been told no in his life. Clara stared right back, unflinching. You lose, she thought. We win. The judge called for a break. In the hall, their witnesses gathered around them. Whatever happens, Margaret said, you should know my father always said you were one of the good ones, Jed. He said this valley was lucky to have you. I was lucky to know him. He would be proud of the family you have made. Her eyes went from Clara to Tommy. Some things are worth more than silver. What do you mean? Margaret looked sad. That greedy Ashworth has been looking for the silver my father found here years ago. My father kept it a secret because he knew what would happen. Men would come with machines and tear up this whole valley. He chose to protect this place. But you told Ashworth. No, someone else must have found his notes after he passed. The point is, you are not just fighting for a home. You are fighting for the future of this entire valley. If Ashworth wins, he will destroy it all. This was bigger than one ranch. It was for the whole valley's future. An hour later, the judge returned. I have reviewed the evidence, he announced, and I find Mr. Ashworth's claim of abandonment to be completely without merit. A cheer went through the room. Clara squeezed Jed's hand. Furthermore, the judge continued, I find that several of Mr. Ashworth's witnesses lied under oath. He glared at the man. Mr. Ashworth, your challenge is denied. The Hollister claim is valid. And if you bring this kind of manufactured nonsense in my court again, I will have you arrested myself. The courtroom erupted in celebration. Tommy threw his arms around Clara, then Jed, laughing and crying all at once. We won, Clara breathed. Jed pulled her close. Yes, ma'am, we did. Ashworth was shoved toward the door, his lawyers having vanished into the crowd. He was alone, his power gone. He paused, his eyes finding Clara. This isn't over, he mouthed, then disappeared. The party at the ranch went on late. Neighbors, once too scared to help, now brought food and well wishes. Hope was finally returning to the valley. Clara stood on the porch, filled with gratitude. Jed came up beside her with a cup of cider and put his arm around her. He's finished, Jed said quietly. The judge's investigation will put him away for good. And if he tries anything outside the law, Jed's arm tightened around her, and then I'll handle it. Tommy burst out the door, his face bright with joy. Margaret's staying a few days. Can I show her where her pa used to camp? Before she could answer, he stopped. I've been thinking what to call you. Clara's heart caught in her throat. Ma don't feel right. Not yet, he said, swallowing hard. But maybe, Clara Ma, like a name just for us. Tears welled in her eyes. Clara knelt down and took his small hands. Clara Ma is perfect, she whispered. He grinned. Good, 'cause I already told everyone. He then darted back inside. Jed pulled her into a hug. Welcome to the family, he said officially. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, the house was finally quiet. I have something for you, Jed said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Clara opened it. Inside was a silver ring with a small blue stone. It ain't much, he said softly, but I wanted you to have something that would last, something to pass down to our children. The words our children hung in the air. Jed took the ring and slid it onto her finger. There's more than one way to make a family. We proved that with Tommy. Babies or no babies, you are enough for me, just as you are. Clara looked from the ring to her husband, this good, strong man. I love you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I love you too. He cupped her face. Now, come to bed. Tomorrow is the first day of the rest of our lives. Outside, stars filled the Colorado sky. The battle was over, and the family was finally at rest. But a new life, a tiny miracle, was already stirring inside Clara. The weeks that followed were filled with simple joys. Clara learned the ways of the ranch and found happiness in the small, precious moments of her new life. But then her body started to feel wrong. The morning sickness began 3 weeks after the hearing. At first, she dismissed it as nerves or bad food. But when it kept on for a 4th week, she started to worry. You look a little green, Tommy said one morning. You've been sick every day for a week now. It's nothing, she insisted. Tommy's eyes narrowed. My ma used to get sick like that. He paused. Clara Ma, are you? Don't, she said, holding up a hand. The doctor said I couldn't. The memory of the fire, the damage, made her voice break. Tommy's young face grew determined. I'm getting Widow Tucker. He was out the door before she could argue. An hour later, Jed found her still sitting at the table, frozen in fear. Tommy rode past me like a bat out of heck. Said you were sick. What's wrong? I don't know, she whispered. Clara, what is it? She looked into his eyes and saw the future she was so afraid of losing. I might be pregnant. Jed froze, boy. Pregnant. But the doctor said, forget what the doctor said, he said, his voice fierce. What does your body tell you? It says something is different, she cried. But I'm so scared, Jed. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Whatever happens, we face it together. That was the promise. Pearl Tucker arrived within the hour. She sent the men out of the bedroom and got straight to business. All right, lie down. Let me have a look. Clara answered Pearl's questions in a small, shaky voice. Finally, Pearl sat back, her face impossible to read. Well, Clara's voice cracked. When was your last monthly? Pearl asked. I don't remember. Maybe 2 months ago. And the sickness? About 4 weeks now. Pearl nodded. Now tell me exactly what those doctors said. Clara repeated the clinical words she knew by heart. Scarring, unlikely to conceive. Pearl just snorted. Doctors, they only know what they read in books. The body has its own wisdom. What are you saying? Pearl squeezed her hand. I'm saying congratulations, Clara Hollister. You're carrying a child. The world simply stopped. That's not possible. Possible or not, it's the truth, Pearl said gently. You're about 2 months along. Some miracles don't ask for permission. Clara finally broke down, sobbing with a relief so deep it shook her whole body. Jed burst through the door, his face pale with worry. What is it? Is she? She's better than fine, Pearl said, standing up. You're going to be a father, Josiah Hollister. Jed's knees nearly gave out. He stared at Clara as if seeing her for the first time. A father? The doctors were wrong, Clara said, her voice full of tears and joy. They were wrong about everything. Jed crossed the room and fell to his knees beside the bed, taking her in his arms. He gathered her up in his arms, and she felt the tremor that went through his big frame. He was crying. The strong man who had endured so much was crying with relief. I love you, he whispered into her hair. I love you too. Tommy appeared, looking worried. Why is everyone crying? Clara held out a hand. Come here, she said softly. She took his small hand and placed it on her belly. You are going to be a big brother. The boy's eyes went wide. For real? But you said... Sometimes doctors are wrong, Clara said, smiling through her own tears. Sometimes miracles happen. Tommy's face crumpled, and he threw his arms around her. I prayed for this, he sobbed. I prayed we would be a real family. We are, Clara whispered, stroking his hair. We already are. The sound of hooves pounding hard sent Jed to the window. Who is it? Clara asked, her hand resting on her belly. Pearl and Tommy stood close by. Sheriff Marsh, Jed said, and he's in a hurry. On the porch, the sheriff was out of breath. It's Ashworth. He skipped town, but not before hiring some rough men. They're coming to burn you out. How many? 6, maybe 7, armed and angry. Clara felt a familiar chill. Fire, wish it was fire. How much time we got? Jed asked. An hour, maybe less. My deputies are spread thin. Jed looked at Pearl. Get Clara and Tommy to your place. No, Clara said, stepping outside. I'm not leaving. This is my home. Our family. We faced this together. That was our promise. Jed stared at her, his frustration melting into pride. Stubborn woman, he said. You married me, she replied. He turned to Tommy. You know where the extra rifles are? Barn behind the feed bin. Go get 'em. Ammunition is under my bed. As Tommy ran, Pearl grabbed Clara's arm. This is pure madness, child, but I'm staying. Clara nodded. Pearl squared her shoulders. I brought enough folks into this world. Reckon I can help keep a few from leaving it too soon. They had 45 minutes. Jed secured the windows while Clara loaded the rifles. Tommy set out water buckets, and Pearl gathered medical supplies. They'll come from the north, Jed said. It's the only real cover. What if they split up? Clara asked. Then we do too. Tommy, you take the east window. Clara, you take the west. I've got the front. And me? Pearl asked. I can shoot, she stated plainly. Jed handed her a rifle without a word. Then they waited. The silence was heavy. Clara crouched by her window, the rifle cool against her shoulder, trying not to think about the new life growing inside her. Movement, Tommy's voice was calm. North Ridge, just like you said. Jed peered out. I see 'em. 7 men. What do we do? Tommy asked. We wait, Jed said. Let them come to us. The riders grew larger, dark figures against the snow. A man shouted from the outside, Hollister, we don't want you. Just send out the woman and we'll be on our way. Go to hell, Jed yelled back. Ashworth wants what's his, the man hollered. She ain't his. Jed's voice was iron. She belongs to herself, and she's staying here. The silence that followed was broken by the sharp crack of a rifle. Your funeral. The first bullet smashed through the front window, showering Jed in glass. He ducked and fired back. Clara saw one of the attackers grab his shoulder and fall. From the east, Tommy watched for anyone trying to circle around, his young face hardened with a resolve well beyond his years. Pearl shouted from the kitchen, two of them are heading for the barn. Clara's heart stopped. The horses. They were going to burn the horses. Let them go, Jed said, his voice tight. We can't split up. Clara saw the torment in his eyes. Those horses were his whole life, everything he had worked for. Cover me, she said, moving to the back. They won't expect me from behind. I can stop them. You are pregnant, Jed pleaded. Our baby needs a home to grow up in. She picked up another pistol. Please, Jed, cover me. He looked like he wanted to chain her to the floor, but then he gave a single pained nod. Careful. Always, she whispered. Clara slipped out the back, using the house to hide her approach. The cold air bit at her, but she did not feel it. She saw the two men nearing the barn, completely unaware. She moved up right behind them, her pistol raised and her voice steady as a rock. Stop right there. They spun around, reaching for their guns. Clara fired without a second thought, and the first man went down screaming as he clutched his leg. The second man froze for just a heartbeat, but that was all she needed. Drop your gun. He dropped it. Now, you get your friend and you get off this land. You tell Ashworth this is finished. The man stared at this small, scarred woman with a fire in her eyes. You're crazy, he breathed. No, she said. I am a mother protecting her family. There is a big difference. He dragged his wounded partner away. As they disappeared, the gunshots from the house stopped. She ran back inside. The front room was a wreck of broken glass and overturned tables. But Jed was on his feet. So were Tommy and Pearl. Clara, Jed said, rushing to her side, are you hurt? I am fine. The two by the barn are long gone. The others? 3 are dead and 2 ran off. The sheriff's men caught them down the road. Jed's hands moved over her, checking for any injury. You scared me to death. I will do whatever it takes for this family, she said. Jed looked at her then, not with anger, but with a fierce, overwhelming pride that terrified him. Tommy stood beside them, pale but proud. We won, he said. Jed looked out the busted window. Ashworth was finished. He had no more money for hired guns or lawyers. It is over, Jed confirmed. Was hard. Clara pulled the boy into a hug. That is enough, she said gently. We do not wish for suffering, not even on men like him. Hate is a poison that eats you from the inside. Tommy looked at Jed, then back to her. Fine, but I'm not going to feel sorry for him either. That is fair enough. The ranch took days to clean up, but with help from neighbors, it started to feel like a home again. A month went by, then 2. Clara's belly began to swell. Every night, Tommy would talk to the baby, telling it stories about the ranch. Do you think it can hear me? He asked one evening. I think it can feel you, Clara said, placing his hand on her stomach. Feel that? Tommy's eyes grew wide. It moved. It does that when you talk. It loves its big brother already. The word brother made Tommy glow with pride. He had never been a big brother before. I am going to be the best one ever, he promised. I will teach it to ride and fish. I will make sure nobody ever hurts it. I know you will, Clara said. Jed appeared in the doorway, his face soft. Nobody is taking anyone, he said. This family stays together. The baby decided to come in early spring, just as the snow was melting. Clara woke in the middle of the night and knew it was time. Jed, she said, shaking him, the baby is coming. He was instantly awake. Tommy, he yelled, go get Widow Tucker, ride fast. Tommy was out the door in a flash, helped Clara to the bed. I am scared, Jed, she admitted. Me too, but we will face this together. The pain came in powerful waves. Clara squeezed Jed's hand, certain she would break it, but he just held on tighter. Pearl arrived as the sun came up with a pale Tommy behind her. She took charge, sending everyone but Jed out of the room. The hours blurred into a storm of pain and effort. "You can do this, Clara," Pearl encouraged. "You are almost there." "I cannot," she cried. "You can," Jed said, his face close to hers. "You survived so much to get here. You can do this." "I love you," he whispered. "Stay with me, like you have done everything else." With one last push and one final scream, a new sound filled the room. A beautiful tiny cry. "A girl," Pearl announced with tears in her own eyes. "A perfect, healthy girl." Jed took the small bundle, his hands trembling. "A daughter," he whispered in awe. "We have a daughter." Clara held out her arms. She looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face and felt a love so powerful it took her breath away. "Hello, little one. I am your mama." The baby's eyes opened, and for a moment, Clara felt like they had known each other forever. "What should we name her?" Jed asked. Clara thought of their long, hard journey. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope. Any longer." Tommy burst in, stopping short when he saw the baby. Is she okay?" "She is perfect," Clara said, holding out a hand to him. "Come and meet your sister." Tommy walked over slowly, his tough exterior gone. "She is so little. Can I hold her?" Clara carefully placed the baby in his arms, showing him how to support her head. Tommy stood completely still, hardly daring to breathe. "Hey, Hope," he whispered. "I am Tommy, your big brother. I will take care of you forever." The baby made a soft little noise, and Tommy broke into the biggest grin Clara had ever seen. "She knows me," he said. Later that night, the four of them were together in the big bed. Hope slept on Clara's chest, with Tommy nestled between his parents. "Is this real?" Tommy asked quietly. "This family?" "Promise me this is real," Tommy whispered later, exhausted and asleep in minutes. Jed took Clara's hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft, "for answering my advertisement, for coming all this way, and for staying when you had every reason to run." He choked up a little. "For giving me a daughter, a family." Clara squeezed his hand. "You gave me the same. A home, a reason to keep going." "I love you, Clara Hollister." "I love you too, Josiah Hollister." She looked at her sleeping stepson, her newborn daughter, and the man who had built this life for them. "No regrets," she whispered. "Not a single one." 2 years later, Clara stood on that same porch, watching Tommy help little Hope learn to walk. The girl was stubborn, just like her parents. "Just like her mama," Jed said, coming up behind her. "Any word from Denver?" "Margaret's doing fine," he answered. "Her husband's business is booming." He paused. "And that silver vein is going to stay right where it is. Some things are worth more than money." Clara watched Hope take 3 wobbly steps before tumbling into Tommy's arms with a laugh. "Higher," the little girl squealed as he swung her onto his shoulders. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, the happy kind that come when your heart is just too full. "I used to think I was broken," she said quietly. "The fire, the scars. I thought I was damaged for good. But I was never broken. I was just waiting for this place, this family." She looked up at her husband. "Waiting for you." "Took you long enough to find me," Jed teased, kissing her forehead. Hope shrieked with laughter as Tommy galloped around the yard. The setting sun painted the mountains in gold and rose. On the porch of a home built with loving hands, Clara Hollister, once a widow with 40 cents to her name, counted her blessings. A home that couldn't be taken, and a family that couldn't be broken. She had come west, looking only for survival, but she had found everything. "Mama!" Hope's voice rang out. "Look, I'm flying!" On Tommy's shoulders, her arms were spread wide, her face pure joy. "Yes, baby," Clara called back. "You're flying." In a way, they all were. That's what love does. It takes broken people and makes them whole. Clara no longer believed she was damaged, or that her worth was measured by what doctors told her she could not do. She believed in the man who saw beauty in her scars, the boy who opened his heart to her, and the daughter who defied every expectation. The shadows grew long as Tommy carried a sleepy Hope inside. Jed wrapped his arm around Clara's waist. They stood together, watching the last light fade. "No regrets?" he asked, just like he did that first night hope was born. Clara smiled. "Not a single one. Not ever." "Good," he said, and then he said, kissing her, "because I've got plans for us, the forever kind." Clara looked at this quiet, strong man and felt a deep peace settle in her soul. Home wasn't a place with four walls and a roof. Home was here now, always. Home was them, and they were forever.